Hey, everybody. My name is Justin, and I'm joined by my co host and producer, Anthony. And we are talking e commerce. Today's guest is Nabil. He's the Senior Vice President of E-commerce Global for DHL. He has a background in e commerce, in logistics and supply chain management, and innovative technologies. And we're so excited to have him here today. Welcome to the show.
Thank you, Justin.
All right, so just getting started, we're curious about your career journey. I mean, could you tell us a little bit about what inspired you to pursue a career in e-commerce and logistics and supply chain?
Yeah, absolutely. I actually started in international trade. I don't think you grow up and want to be working in logistics, but I did want to work in international trade. And in fact, I started my journey in China. I was working there in trading, and I was doing import export for a small company, and I started to get more and more exposed to supply chain and logistics. I was doing quality control and all that, and there was an opportunity then to jump really into the supply chain part of the business. And I started to work in this space, and I realized how exciting it was, and how many people didn't realize that it's really like ultimately the blood of the economy, and it's what connects everything. And I think we heard a lot during the pandemic, people realizing how important it is for businesses, for all of us.
Yeah.
And so I just got really hooked into this, and I started my journey initially in freight forwarding. So I was doing primarily like air freight, sea freight, and so on. And then I moved into parcel, domestic, international services. And then now I do a lot of the contract logistics, e-commerce businesses. And I think right now it's like the most exciting place to be when it comes to supply chain, for sure.
Wow. So I'm curious about your leadership experience at DHL. When did you start, and how did you get to be the senior vice president of global e-commerce? And I saw that you were also employee of the year. So I'm just curious about what insights that you could share with our audience. They're all looking to develop our careers and to grow and to be able to contribute more.
Yeah, I think one of the things that has worked out really well for me was there are a couple of things, but one was first of all finding mentors and finding people that can really help you. And sometimes mentors sound like very formal and all this, but ultimately it's people you can go to, at least in my description, people you can go to, you trust enough that you can ask them the hard questions. They're going to want the best for you, and they're going to help you. And that it's important to have whatever environment you work in an organization, but also outside of that organization. You get both, right? You get people that have actually a vested interest professionally because they work with you and they are close to you and so on, but also people that have actually no interest in any way, shape, or form, and they are completely neutral. I think it's important. So I think mentors are really, really important, and they will help you to take the right decisions, and they eventually also might help you to push some of the decisions that might result then into more opportunities. The second thing is I highly invested in going into emerging markets early in my career. And that was on purpose. So I was working in China, I was working in Latin America. And the reason why I did that was that I'm originally from France. I grew up in France. And I left Europe also on purpose at the time because I felt that there were a lot more opportunities across developing countries. And that's also true for when you think about the business. If you look at why I moved into e-commerce a couple of years ago before it became so popular, is because I saw that was the fastest, less mature part of the business. And so I think when you go into these areas of business where there is a lot of movement, it's very dynamic, there's a lot of change, there's a lot of need for innovation, people breaking statu quo and so on, you just can get a lot more opportunities in general. And I think the last one, I think it's always not talked enough, but a lot of people talk about like how hard it is to be an entrepreneur. I think the successful people in large corporations work very hard.
Yeah.
And they have to, and you have to also aim to be the best or one of the best at what you do, and that requires also time and requires a lot of work. So I think working hard is also something that is underrated, maybe sometimes across the different groups of businesses that we can talk to.
How great points. Next, I wanted to shift to getting your insights on innovative technologies. things like drones, self-driving vehicles, and robotics. How do you see these emerging technologies shaping our industry, say over the next decade?
Yeah, absolutely. I think I'm a big advocate of technology. I think history has proven that you can actually deploy technology and still be socially conscious, and make sure that this is deployed in a way that it's also responsibly done. Um, I think right now the biggest in supply chain, I think the biggest impact in terms of like workforce is robotics and automation.
Okay.
That is, physical robotics and automation, conveyor systems, robotic arms, and so on, as well as obviously softwares. And of course, we talk a lot about AI right now, but it's also things like RPA, which is way less sexy, but actually in supply chain, you often find companies using 10 systems, and then you have to connect this, and you have to transfer data points and so on. I think these are going to be improving. These technologies are going to continue to improve the way we work, the way we manage costs, the way we can optimize. Really, there is so many opportunities, and everybody that is in this space and that actually work on a daily basis see every day 20 things that we can be improving, right? I mean, and and we need technology. Technology is a key pillar of how we get there to make these improvements, from visibility to removing like very difficult tasks, for the people that are doing this type of very hard work and so on. So technology is going to be part of it. I think if we think about 10 years, I think, in my opinion, the biggest change will be autonomous vehicle. And I think, there is always like autonomous vehicle is one of these things where, you move 2 steps and you go backward 1 step, you move 2 steps. There's always in the media, it's really covered in a different manner. But I think we don't need to get to level 5 full autonomy before we start to see major impact. Even at level 4, semi-automated, remotely controlled vehicles, you're going to start to see a major impact, because in the logistics space, delivery, tracking, all the transport aspect of goods is normally the highest cost, and the highest cost within the highest cost is the drivers. It's the human capital of it.
Yeah.
And today there's not enough drivers also. So I think autonomous vehicle, at least in my opinion, next 10 years is going to be the biggest one.
Okay. I want to ask you about last mile challenges. So DHL has one of the world's largest networks for last mile delivery. This is a term that we're hearing about more and more, and the rising cost. And so I wanted to get your insights and your thoughts on last mile.
Yeah, so last mile is very interesting because there is of course a lot of investment that have been done in this space in the last, I would say, 6-7 years, right? If you look actually at the amount of investment put from VCPE across the logistics space, hyper local deliveries and deliveries in general is the one that received the most in terms of funding by far, a lot more than warehousing, a lot more than freight forwarding, and so on. And it's not necessarily the biggest spend, but it is the one that has the highest level of attention. Why? Because you're touching final consumers, because it's time sensitive, because it's the one that is the easiest to understand for people that are not necessarily deep in the industry. And so it's an area that is moving a lot. What we see now that is becoming the most complicated is, traditionally last mile was you go from a store or you go from a warehouse and you go to a consumer door or you go to a store, location. It was really basically linear. Today, consumers want to have the ability to decide, oh, well, I'm not home. Don't bring it to my home, bring it to me here. And so you have this, and that's just one example, right? And that's this dynamic environment where consumers want actually to have control about their delivery experience, and they want to be able to tell you, no, don't send it to me here. I'm on vacation. Give it to my neighbor. So you start to see all this increased complexity, and you have to manage this, at the same cost, or eventually at lower cost, because obviously, there is inflation every year, and so you have to keep, really looking at like how do you do that through technology, because there's no alternative. Through technology, how do you do that? Even two-ways communication before in last mile were inexistent, and now you see consumer expecting to almost be able to chat with drivers, which for many years was not accepted. It was not like something that you would want to do because it distract them. It's a matter of seconds, right? A driver that does 250, 300 deliveries in a day, it's a matter of seconds. It takes him like a minute more per delivery, you're off schedule.
Yeah.
As an example. So I think this rising consumer expectation, and how do you combine that with operational efficiencies, and of course you have to inject as well at the same time sustainability. I was just reading an article just this week, was published from Wall Street Journal. Was talking about like the fleets. DHL has the largest electric fleets with 29,000 vehicles worldwide. But that is, we are planning to go to 80,000, by 2030, right? And so it's like, how do you also ramp up that, knowing that that means charging infrastructure, means certain other element, and there's no way around this. There are countries, there are cities that are going to be definitely pushing for that. I mean, in Europe, it's already happening. You have regulation already target by cities, and so everybody's going to have to comply with this. And so that's, I think, some of the dimension of complexity.
So in addition to last mile, the other thing that we hear about so much now, and I know that you talk a lot about this, is e-commerce returns. So this is reverse logistics, or big challenge for brands, for 3PLs. How is this something that DHL is helping with, and how do you, what's your advice for brands, for 3PLs, just in general, how to handle these massive amount of returns?
Yeah. So I think it is, I think, in my opinion, it's one of the biggest also opportunity right now to improve for any business, particularly the one that have obviously the highest rate of returns, which usually are fashion and apparel, for good reasons, right? Because most of the cases people return because of the fit, because of the color, or it doesn't look the same way it looked on pictures that were taken by models and a bit touched, right? So we know all that story. But the logistics aspect of this can really make a significant impact. Why? Because that entire experience from a return perspective, starting from the return request and the digital experience around, like, oh, I want to return it, and what are the options that companies will give you right off the request that you're making, instead of returning, maybe making an exchange, maybe keeping it and have a discount. There's many mechanisms from that digital interface up to how do you return the product. Do you consolidate them and then ship them together instead of returning individual parcels, which will cost you a lot more money? Are you using the same delivery company that you are shipping product with? Are you using that same delivery company for the return with the same service level, which is absolutely not necessary, because you will always want to have a faster delivery time than a return time. Of course, people will argue, yes, you have inventory carrying cost and you have other things, but still, you don't want to pay, if you can save 30% on delivery, on a return, and it takes 2 more days, you definitely would want to do that, as an example. And so, and then you have the fulfillment part of it, right? How many of the products can you receive and try to really put back in premium inventory? Because that is the most important, ultimately, is, well, if I have to receive this product back, how do I bring back the highest amount at the highest level of margin for my business? Can I have a partner that can, iron, relabel, do some level of value-added services, so that I avoid destruction of item? Can I have also channels to liquidate some of the products instead of destroying, right? I mean, the worst thing you want to do is to ultimately destroy items. Of course, you can always donate, but donate financially, you're not going to have any returns, which is a great thing to do as well for companies. But if you look at it, so I think returns is one of the big opportunities. And one last thing I think which is really important for anybody watching is, people always ask me, hey, should we do, Amazon changed their policy, should we do the same? Oh, Zara changed their policy, should we do the same? I'm like, look, every business has its own reality. The first thing you should really do is look at your data on returns, because you might find, and this is real cases experience, you might find that 1% of your customer base is representing 90% of the returns. And so if you're going to do something, as opposed to change the policy to 100% of your customers, go after this 1%, try to look at who are the 1%, what are the characteristics of this 1%. Maybe it's a geographical area. Maybe it's, a product type. Maybe it's actually your listing that has problems, and you have a picture maybe that shows an item as purple and it's a bit more bluish, right?
Yeah.
Like these things, like in the data, you have a lot of information, and it's surprising. But even companies that like have like tens of thousands of returns, they don't go into that level of detail.
Wow. Really great information. So I ask all of our guests, what's your top advice for e-commerce merchants that are just starting out? So they want to build up some traction. They're just launching their store. And then what's your best advice for brands that are already well established, maybe already a 7-figure brand, but they want to take it to 8 figures?
Yeah. So on the the ones that are starting, I think you really want to look at first of all, if you have a differentiated and non-differentiated product, is very important, because if you have not so differentiated product, you really want to go the path of marketplaces and the path of where you don't have to invest so much into traffic, right? And in digital marketing. If you have a differentiated product, you definitely would want to go social commerce right now, right? I mean, TikTok Shop is probably the biggest thing happening right now in e-commerce, and you don't have the same level of competition, right? I mean, if you try to go with a product and compete today on Amazon on well-established channels, what you're going to find is, well, there's already like, most likely multiple companies with 10, 20, 50,000 reviews, but you're going to have to compete with them. And even if you can buy advertising, so it's going to be much harder, as opposed to some of these newer channels that there is much less competition. People don't dominate yet that space, and so you have a lot more opportunity. I think social commerce, right now, I think we probably have still going to be like a ramp up. Right now is the way to go if you were to launch a business. And there are multiple stories of companies that build large businesses only out of TikTok. And I think that's a good opportunity for the ones that have already, let's say, 1 to 10 million of revenue. I think that scale phase oftentimes will go through a process of a delegation and outsourcing. I've seen many founders, and I know many founders that started and they were doing everything themselves, and then when it comes to, well, you want to scale, you really have to bring the right talent, and you have to also outsource some of the activities, being logistics, or being content production, or there are different things that, because you're not going to be able to continue to do everything yourself, and then you have to start to look at how do you really look for the right partners, for the right people to work with, to be able to grow that business to the next wave of growth.
Really great stuff. All right, so I want to bring Anthony on the mic so he can ask you a question. And I mean, he's always got some really great questions. He was listening in. So Anthony, are you there?
Yeah, I'm here.
Right.
So I'd like to go back to talk about your electric vehicles. I think that's the way that the future is going. And you mentioned that you guys are going to be expanding, and that's great. Could you touch a little bit more on the complications of infrastructure and setting up for all these new electric vehicles?
Yeah, absolutely. So today you have to, so there's 2 levels of complexity. You have, I would say, the simpler one, which is basically routes where you're going to have a vehicle that can, within the range of the vehicle, you can do the entire shift and the entire route. Think about like hyperlocal deliveries, where a van will leave from a sorting facility, do somewhere between 30 to maybe 80 miles, and you can do that with a vehicle, and then it comes back to a sorting facility. That is relatively easier to actually build the charging infrastructure around that, because you have always cycles where you can actually charge in one location, vehicles are leaving and they're coming back always to the same place. The second one that is way more complex, and that is why you see less adoption on the long haul, is when you have like trucks, like trucks that are crossing the country, regional transportation business needs that are doing 300, 500, 600 miles in sequence. Then you will have to rely on partner for the charging infrastructure, because you're not going to be able to build all the infrastructure by yourself. I mean, today the one that has the largest charging network is Tesla. But even Tesla is really delayed on their semi truck. I mean, I think it's 4 years delay now at this point, or 3 years delay. but you have the option, of course, to build it yourself, which I think is a good path, of course, with partners, but build it yourself on places where you have closed loops and these routes where you can have, with one charge you can do the delivery, and then you're going to have to work with a combination of maybe own facilities plus partner facilities, and there are also multiple companies also building or planning to build some infrastructure that can be shared between different organizations. It's going to be absolutely critical in the long term.
All right, thank you. You also mentioned the complications in connecting different businesses together because everyone's using different systems. You touched on a couple of things, but could you go a little bit more into the complications of that?
Oh yeah. So it's hard to compare to other industries, but I think in supply chain, we definitely have this massive complexity when it comes to technology. The amount of softwares you have to use, order management system, warehouse management system, warehouse execution system, warehouse control system, TMS, reverse management systems now. I mean, just that, which are like kind of like some of the traditional categories, just that, oftentimes, if you look at best in class, you will most likely have different players that will be able. Some companies can do multiple areas, but they are usually never the best in class at everything. You will find best in class in the respective categories. So already this requires integration. It requires the understanding of where do I put which company, and so the evaluation process, the integration process, the engineering process, because of course you always want to have technology mapping into process flow, because in logistics we also touch physical products. It's not only about technology, right? It always needs to match the most effective physical flow that you can have to operate. And so this is one of the big complexity. Now, when you add this to the interfaces to customers, right? Then you go into larger brands, and then you realize, the large brands, they have, an ERP from the 90s, and they have also put a lot of, add-ons, or they've done, they've added different pieces of technology to try to resolve, but not without touching the ERP base. I think this then start to become like the landscape that we have to work with. And I know, for some people it's easy to say, well, yeah, you can evolve, but when you look at many of the Fortune 500 companies and you tell them, hey, why don't we change the ERP? It's a 3-4 years journey, and it's a very, very large investment, very, very large, very risky decision. That's why you still see airlines, whenever you go at the counter, you ask for a change of ticket, and you see the lady or the man like typing 50 times. If you go on the app, you get that information much faster, because these operating systems are hard to change, very expensive to change. And in the transportation industry, we have still quite a lot of legacy systems, because we operate, and that is why it's more complex. You have to manage this business at large scale, and the risk is high.
Well, thank you very much. I'm glad I'm not the only one that finds it such a headache.
No, thank you so much for joining us. This was great. You shared a wealth of knowledge, great conversation. And if any of our viewers or listeners, they want to get in touch with you, if they have a follow-up question, or they just want to learn more about you or DHL, what's the best way for them to connect with you?
Yeah, on LinkedIn is the best, and it's actually a good place, because I also share content there on a regular basis.
Yeah, I'm a big fan.
So thank you.
I learned a lot.
Thank you, Justin. Yeah, no, thank you. So on LinkedIn would be definitely the best. We can connect and can chat. Certainly happy to chat. And yeah, thank you, Justin, Anthony, for having me. It's great to be here.
Well, thanks again.
Thank you.
Okay.